Good evening to all of you guys. Welcome inside the collective. It is a Tuesday evening on the 23rd of September. It's technically week 4 of this NFL regular season, but week 3 was such a doozy that we got over an hour of content to get into, including Cole's flexing his guest booking muscles, if you will. The great Mitch Schwartz, Super Bowl champion, all-pro. He's going to be joining us in 30 minutes' time, and we're going to talk trenches with him. Cole, great booking by you, by the way. Well done.
Yeah, I impressed myself.
I love it. I think we all play golf, or at least we know enough about the game of golf. A little bit of hamming and egging going on in here. We're all doing our own thing and enjoying it along the way. Hopefully this will be therapeutic for some of you out there. I've also seen in mentions, people are like, we'll see you next week, guys. And we get it. We get it regardless. But anyway, we got a lot to get into. Of course, 38-30, as you guys know now, hasn't exactly been 24 hours to digest this thing. But Ravens lose. They drop to 1-2. It's a short week. Kansas City looms. A trip to Arrowhead looms. It's a 4:25 kicking off next weekend. But again, let's revisit this the first half of the show, and then we'll really be able to use Mitch as a way of not only taking a look at this offensive line play so far through 3 weeks, but ultimately taking a look at the league as well and just having a big picture conversation I know all three of us are looking forward to. So Jeff Zrebiec, of course, of The Athletic, Cole Jackson, Road Graders. I'm Bobby Trossett. Great to have you guys with us. Tonight's episode is brought to you by our friends at Sleeper. And if you could on the way in, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. We'll get to as many super chats as we can tonight. But I thought we could begin with this, fellas. 2 things. One, a sentiment shared by Jeff at the end of the game, and I'll just read it before I cut to a compilation that I've put together that I think sums up in 90 seconds the state of this team coming off last night's loss. And Jeff, you wrote, in their losses, the Ravens typically do plenty of beating themselves. They obviously made their share of mistakes tonight, but this has been a butt whooping. Lions won at both lines of scrimmages. They've been more physical, more aggressive, better in just about every way. Here is a look at the losing locker room last night in Baltimore.
Very good. I think biggest thing on playing on the Ravens defense is the organization, the fans, they've seen greatness. So being bad, being good, really, it's just not the standard.
Definitely not where we wanted to be. No excuses can be made at this point. If it's not one thing, it's another, and we just got to patch everything up right now.
Just the biggest problem is we didn't play good run defense. I mean, we didn't, as a defense complete, we didn't do it, and that's not going to be good enough. There's nobody in that locker room that thinks that's good enough. That's disappointing. That's bad run defense, and that's not who we are. It cannot be who we are. It's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be acceptable, and it's got to be better.
I feel like week 1 was a wake-up call. Not just this loss. Week 1 was a wake-up call. Last week was a wake-up call, because we started off slow last week, and we got beat tonight. Lions had a great game plan. I feel like offense and defense for those guys played great. We just got to find a way to win.
Yeah, man, I'm my worst critic, so I'm gonna watch the film. I continue to watch it. I know we got a short week, but it's just crazy. Man. 3 fumbles straight. Trying every day to fix a problem, just keeps occurring. So I'm trying to work on it, man. I'm my worst critic, so I'm not gonna try to beat myself up too much, but it's hard not to when it's consecutive and consistent and doing the same thing.
Jeff, you've been covering this team for a long time. You're our boots on the ground, obviously. So I think a lot of people are wondering what your thoughts are coming off last night, what you heard, what you witnessed, what you watched, and ultimately where this team is entering week 4.
Yeah, I just realized when you put up that tweet of mine that I spelled butt whooping wrong, which is my bad. But at that point of the night, I was probably delirious. But yeah, like usually when I get back up from the press box after, doing all the interviews and sitting in on the podium stuff, after a loss, I usually can kind of put it to one thing that I thought was the reason they lost, or one play or one moment or one coaching decision. I sat there and I'm like, everything. It was everything. And you don't say that too often about the Ravens. I can't recall too many times in recent years in the Lamar Jackson era where I just thought they just got so thoroughly outplayed physically and manhandled on both lines of scrimmage. And I know people are going to say, well, they had a lead in the third quarter and they only lost by 8. And if they had done this, they'd done that. Yeah, that's all true, but they were outplayed in this game in every facet. You just can't look at the stats and not realize that. But the biggest thing that stuck with me, guys, is just the physical mismatch. And the Ravens are a team that pride themselves on being the bullies. They're particularly adopt that role when they're playing at home at night. They brought out all the bells and whistles and the celebrities. And Bobby, you were there, and they just were they were beaten at their own game last night, and that's the biggest concern. And that's why those guys, that's why that was a pretty humbling locker room and podium. They knew they may deny it. It doesn't. These guys are macho, athletic, physical guys. It's not easy to admit that they got pushed around physically, but that's exactly what happened. In every phase, they were outplayed, outcoached, all that. The only exception may have been special teams. They were fine on special teams last night. I know Stout shanked a late one, but he had a couple good punts, and Tyler hit his kick. So that really wasn't an issue. Rasheen Ali had a nice return. But otherwise, offense, defensively at the line of scrimmage, they just didn't match up to one of the league's better teams. And that's going to have to sit in their craw until they get another chance to prove otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone reached out to me on Twitter this morning, and they were just like, "Why are you so mad?" And it is funny. Like I've found as I've gotten older, I've gotten less into it, but there is something about being thoroughly beat up in the trenches that I just can't stand. It's everything that goes against what this team's identity is supposed to be, what this organization's identity is supposed to be. And they lost both trenches, and it's kind of 2 weeks in a row where it's kind of happened. And it really feels like a lot of the physicality. And, even if you go back to where, Roquan and Teddy Buchanan had success in the run game last week, it wasn't necessarily stepping up and being more physical. It was getting to the gap quicker. It was reading their plays. And, we kind of talked about it last week. This was going to be a different run blocking scheme. They were going to get in your face. They were going to come downhill. And that's exactly what happened. And, what I found so frustrating was their inability to get off the field on third down. Because, a lot of people were kind of focusing on the run defense, which was obviously a problem. But if you look at it by quarter, it's actually pretty insane. They were just fine in the first quarter. It wasn't until that drive, the 98-yard drive, they had 2 third down conversions, and the D-line got worn down. They were rotating in their second guys, and then they went back to the starters once they got into their own end. And by that time, everyone's exhausted. And then they just started pounding the rock, and they did it for the rest of the game. But it was those inabilities on third down to get off the field is why you got worn down. They gave up drives of 98 and 96 yards. And it felt like what the 2019 Ravens used to do. They would have that ground attack. They would grind you out. They'd use an efficient passing game. When Jared Goff needed to make a pass, he did. Guys like Laporta, guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, they made plays when they needed to. They just had everything clicking for them. But at the same time, they got embarrassed in the trenches. There was absolutely zero pass rush at any point last night. They were blitzing, several of those third down opportunities were man blitz looks. And, you're sending 6 against a 5-man protection, and someone's still not getting home. Like it's just, it's infuriating to watch. So, I don't know. They just seem disjointed. They seem poorly coached. They're kind of coming off the ball slow. You're lining up 6 on the line of scrimmage. They're mugging those A gaps with their linebackers every snap. Nobody's fooled by it. I don't really get all the window dressing, and they're, dropping guys into coverage. We were seeing defensive tackles drop, and it just a lot of bells and whistles when it doesn't seem like this team can play fundamental football right now. I'm thinking back to what my high school coach used to do after we'd lose a game. We'd spend the next 3 days of practice just blocking and tackling. No one was running plays. There was no scrimmage. It was blocking and tackling. And, look at the tackling last night. Malachi Starks missed 3 tackles, one of which was a 72-yard pop by David Montgomery. They just did not play fundamental football, and they got absolutely embarrassed in the trenches in their own house on a Darkness Falls night, which is probably my favorite thing ever. So I feel embarrassed. I feel embarrassed, and the team should feel embarrassed.
Jeff, I'm sure everybody's seen these, but just to set you up with them, next gen stats all over it. Cole just alluded to it. 20 missed tackles. There were a couple numbers that just pop out at you from this game. 30 pressures, 30 total team pressures, and 20 missed tackles. And of course, on top of that, Lamar, a couple pieces of history in the Lamar era you don't want to be on that side of, right? 7 sacks. Now, he took a few of those. I'm sure we'll get into that in the coming minutes here. But 7 total sacks. That's the most throughout the Lamar era. And for the first time since 2018, when he took over for Flacco, they've gone sub 100 rushing yards back-to-back games. So I guess you can take this in a number of different directions, Jeff, but why don't we just start with the elephant in the room? No Nnamdi, no KVN. As you process this 24 hours in almost, how much of that is a part of the equation, and how much in your mind should that be looked at as a part of the equation in what happened last night?
Yeah, it's a part of it. There's a reason. It's always so cute when we hear the next man up comment, but there's a reason guys are backups and guys are starters. They were missing 2 very key guys, 2 veteran leaders, 2 Pro Bowlers. But again, that's not an excuse. They have enough players where they shouldn't have dropped off like that. I think I saw a stat that over 200 of their rushing yards for the Lions came between the tackles. And every clip after clip, there was guys just suctioned to blocks, not getting off blocks. There were guys getting used as blocking sleds, getting pushed down the field. There were guys not holding ground on double teams. Nobody is exempt here from criticism for an effort like this. And yes, it starts with the coaches, having them ready to play. DaCosta has a hand in this. The Ravens used to always talk about building from the inside out, building from the trenches out. And they don't exactly do that they don't have at least as much focus on doing that in recent years. But still, everyone talked about this roster as it was one of the best in the league. I wrote it. I don't know if it was the best. I don't know how you quantify that. But the reality is they're pretty thin if there's injuries in the trenches. And we've seen that already on the defensively with Nnamdi Madubuike going out. And they don't really, they're thin at edge rusher. They didn't have much of an answer for nobody really stepped up without Van Noy. Mike Reed may turn out to be a really good player someday, but he's not there yet. So again, everybody has accountability in this. But if you are getting whipped one-on-one, if you are not winning your matchups, if you are not making plays, you don't stand a chance. And yes, there's things they could do to help, the coaches could do to help them. Ultimately, they've got to put players in the right positions to make plays. They've got to make adjustments. They got to figure this out with what they have. But at some point, guys need to push back and start winning individual matchups. They need to start, nobody's around the football. I haven't seen Malachi Starks around the football in 3 games. And yesterday he missed a ton of tackles. Kyle Hamilton, the guy's the highest played safety by a wide margin. That's the other thing, guys, that I think should be concerned. Not only the physical aspect of what they did and how lopsided some of the stats were back and forth, their stars were bad last night. That's the only way to put it. Your best players were not your best players. There are some exceptions. I don't think Lamar was vintage Lamar, but he played well enough to win. But Roquan Smith did not have a good night. Marlon Humphrey had no answers for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Kyle Hamilton was a non-factor in a game like that. Travis Jones, he put up his PFF grade the other time. And it looked like he got banged up too late in the game, which is another concern going forward. So they got outplayed. I mean, you saw the Lions stars came to play and the Ravens didn't. And when you're not winning individual matchups, when your stars aren't being stars, you're going to have an awfully hard time beating a good football team.
Yeah, I think a big thing that you have to think about when you look at the difference in the mentality, because that Lions offensive line have two guys specifically that are in that, step up mode. They have a second year guy in Christian Mahogany at right guard, and they have a first year guy in Tate Ratledge, who's a rookie. And, those guys struggled in week 1, got it back together in week 2 against, a lesser Bears D line. And then last night they looked really, really solid. And so, those are two guys that were put into a situation that, I would put, Anise Peebles is in a situation where you're kind of expecting a lot out of a 6th-round pick so early in his rookie career, right? Where it's like, okay, maybe he can be our splash play guy. Mike Green's a little bit of a different story. He's an earlier draft pick, but now we're expecting him to kind of be a starter when it was kind of like, well, maybe we can get some rotational pass rush wins out of him. But it just feels to me, when you watch the way they play, Duke Manyweather put it up. There's that duo block where Ratledge and the center are just working Travis Jones directly into Roquan Smith. And it just feels to me like they bought into Dan Campbell's message. They might not be the most talented. They might not be the most athletic, but they're going to work harder than you. And I just feel like the Ravens don't get that message. It doesn't, like, I can't count the amount of times I've seen them in the last 2 years line up 6 across the line of scrimmage, bring everybody, and yet everybody looks so damn slow. Like Roquan Smith, when he mugs that A gap, if you go back and watch it under Mike McDonald, when he, run a stunt with Patrick Queen and they're running like, with their heads cut off. And then, you look at them now and he just looks slow. And I don't get where the disconnect is. And I think that's the most concerning thing. These guys just don't seem to be buying in to the message that these coaches are putting forward. But at the same time, I do absolutely agree with Jeff. Like I put up that play of the 72-yard run from Montgomery, and both Roquan and Kyle Hamilton are down in the box on that run. Malachi Starks misses the tackle, no doubt about it. But Kyle Hamilton he runs into the box and just stood there and got sealed. Roquan Smith, a blocker, works up to the second level and takes him out. Those are two guys that are the highest paid at their position, and they need to make plays. So, it's a combination of both. The players aren't executing, but I also think there's something to be said about not buying into whatever message the coaches are putting forward. So it just really creates this area of dysfunction that this team seems to be in. And even if you switch to the other side of the football, there's been a lot of talk today on social media. Was Lamar Jackson holding on to the football? Was, route combinations that aren't, everything's deep, nothing's open, there's no checkdowns? Was it bad offensive line play? I went through every single pass protection rep, video coming out tomorrow morning to show you guys exactly what it looked like. And the reality is, it isn't one thing. And that's the problem. It's a combination of everything. There were plays where they kept in 7 blockers. They'd keep in their tight end. One of Aiden Hutchinson's sacks, it was one of the sacks. They asked Mark Andrews and Justice Hill to block Aiden Hutchinson, and they ran, a slide protection where the tight end and the running back double on the backside against one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And so, that's a combination of, guys not making a block, but also bad play calling. And then there's another play where, Lamar's hearing footsteps, so he's stepping up, but at the same time, Roger Rosengarten's getting driven into him. So everyone wants to put their finger on that one thing. What's that one thing that caused the issue? The problem is, when you look at the Baltimore Ravens pass protection and the pass game overall, it was way too many things. And this is where things get concerning, because how do you fix everything? So yeah, you can shuffle the O-line. I've seen a lot of people talk about, we just need to get Ricard back. And Ricard is a phenomenal player. I will take Pat Ricard on my team every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But Pat Ricard being on that football field and being able to take care of his assignment isn't going to make someone on the other side of the offensive line take care of their assignment. So I worry about that, because guys just aren't winning those one-on-one matchups. It really comes down to that. But at the same time, there's coaching issues. There's play calling issues. I also think there were some issues with Lamar last night. It's the first time in 2 years where Lamar just genuinely looked like he did not trust his offensive line. You go back to last week, we already recapped this. He was pressured on 54% of his week 2 dropbacks against that 4-man rush from the Browns. You come into this week, pass protection first 2 quarters not bad, but then the pressure's coming up where he got sacked 3 plays in a row. So it's like that's when these plays stack, when these games stack, quarterbacks naturally are not going to trust their offensive line. So, we're getting into a spot where, it's going to get scary quick if they can't figure some of this out. And I think a lot of it is guys buying into the message that the coaches are putting forward.
Lamar was charged directly. I kind of alluded to this earlier on in the stream. According to PFF, with 4 sacks, a hit, and 2 hurries. So again, that 7 overall number is the most in his tenure in Baltimore to date, 4 of which were directly charged to him, which speaks to your point, Cole, and just in terms of it's starting to catch up to him a little bit, maybe that lack of trust. Speaking of trust, Jeff, we know that it took damn near 10 weeks for this defense to round into form a year ago in what was Zach's first year as the DC. They bring in Dean Pease in season. Now he transitions in the offseason to more of a consultant type role. Where do you think the Ravens are when it comes to Zach Orr in year 2? How is that message being received? Clearly he's relatable. I think he's got a level of respect to these guys, given his age, given his resume and whatnot. But where do you think his message is in terms of on the receiving end personnel?
Yeah, I think the problem defensively, and this goes a little bit to what Cole said previously when he said it isn't one thing. Last year with their slow start, they were just getting balls tossed over their heads left and right. Everyone remembers that Bengals game in Jamar Chase, and it was a common theme throughout the early part of their season. They had to solidify that. Now you look at it like, what do they do well defensively? They're not stopping the run suddenly. They're not tackling well. They're not getting to the quarterback. There's still too many open receivers. It's just, it would give you a little more confidence that they were in this just last year and they figured it out and they played good defensive football in the second half of the season. It just feels like the issues this year are more. And if Matabike is out indefinitely and Van Noy's still out a couple weeks and Travis Jones is now hobbled, that's the concern. Like, how do you fix this? And I think the young players will get better, but ultimately Zach Orr has to figure something out here. There's been too many of these games where he just hasn't had an answer. I think you asked, I still haven't heard a player say anything negative about him. I know, Eddie Jackson had his moments with him last year, which led to Eddie Jackson's release. But you talk to the key players in this team, they all rave about him, Hamilton and Humphrey and Roquan. Those guys seem to love him, but this is a results business. And you can't do one of these, okay, we're going to bring in another veteran guy to help out. You can't do that a second year in a row. You did that last year. You can play that hand once, and then if it's still happening a year later, I think you have to make changes. So I don't think, everyone wants to know, is he on the hot seat? Is Harbaugh gonna, move on or make a change there before it gets too late? I mean, who knows? I mean, we saw John Harbaugh fired defensive coordinator in December in the season they won the Super Bowl. An offensive coordinator. So, there's different things that, you never know what John Harbaugh's thinking, but things better get better soon because they're not playing well enough in any facet. And ultimately that starts with the defensive coordinator and in-game adjustments and game planning and preparation and all that.
We're about 5 minutes away, 5 minutes out, I should say, from bringing on Super Bowl champion Mitch Schwartz. Great book there by Cole. So we'll have him on in just a few minutes. We'll get to some super chats. But before we do, guys, a message from this episode's sponsor. That's the folks at Sleeper. And
Sleeper is the #1 fantasy sports app. It pays to know sports. Pick more or less on top players. Your first pick is on us, so start winning now. Play in Texas, Georgia, Minnesota, and 27 more states. Pick anytime across all sports, pregame or live. Over 10 million players are already on Sleeper. Make your picks count, Score up to 1,000 times your cash. Join today, get up to $100 credit using the code HMA. Call your shot on Sleeper. Download now.
All right, let's get all of us in here, shall we? There we are. Still figuring out the whole brackets and whatnot. But anyway, Sleeper is our sponsor. You guys know the drill. When you support our sponsors, you're directly supporting the show. And if you use promo code HMA, you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. You can see Sleeper's terms of use for details. It's currently operational in over 25 states. We encourage you to check out Sleeper today. Thanks for the support. And let's get to some super chats before we bring on Mitchell Schwartz. Chef Trez gets us started. Cole, why don't you take it?
If I hear one more, we like our guys after no sacks or 30 pressures, 7 sacks, I'm going to lose it. The lines on both sides need help. Address it. Shake my head. Agreed with you, Chef Trez. Appreciate you.
Evan's in the house. Jeff, this one's for you.
It is simple. Last night, a well-coached team beat a poorly coached team. That is it. They looked unprepared, rattled, and dejected. I would disagree with that. It's as simple as that. I don't think necessarily when you're getting beat up physically on every aspect, I don't necessarily pin that all on coaching, but certainly coaching has a role in it. And they did look like the more well-coached team and the better coached team last night. But I don't think it only comes down to that. Is I guess my point.
Man, ESPN kept cutting to what looked like sideline exchanges between, some of the star players, whether it was at the end there, DeAndre and Derek, or Lamar and Derek at times, or Harbaugh and Derek. I mean, it just seemed like something was off early on in that game that they weren't able to overcome. That brings us to Nick Marty. Thanks for everybody tuning in tonight. Over 400 concurrents at the moment, or right around that number. Like the video on your way in. Subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Consider throwing in a super chat. We'll get to as many as we can tonight. Nick writes, EDC needs to stop collecting picks and go all in because him and Harbs are wasting Lamar's best years. This one's for you, Jeff. Do you think we are way overhyped? Because I feel like they never addressed losing Michael Pierce, who, of course, was the legend of the game last night and retired in the offseason. What say you, Jeff?
I think Michael Pierce was barely playing at the end of last season. And John Jenkins is a rotational defensive lineman. This is Travis Jones's role now. This is where they wanted him to play. Sure, I think they could. I think the issue is not using a bigger asset, and I'm not talking about a 6th-round pick or a small free agent deal, as in the case with a guy like Noteboom. I think the bigger, or Jenkins, I think the bigger issue is not using an asset, a major asset, to address either offensive or defensive line.
Chef Trez says, shout out to my favorite old heads, Jeff and Cole. I guess I don't fit that category yet.
You don't
Chef,
have the grays in your beard yet. So
is that what's going on? Rod Wave, Cole, for you. And Mitch, you just give us the thumbs up down in the waiting room when you're good to go. We'll bring you on. And in the meantime, Cole, why don't you read our last super chat before we get to Mitch?
Well, it looks like Rod's done. So this season is done. My hope is we hire a new coach and get rid of the staff. Brian Flores should be our next coach. When John said this was not a Super Bowl or bust year, it was over. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting – I kind of think back to last year when the Ravens had their start, especially after starting 0-2, the toe loss to the Chiefs and then losing to the Raiders. And, the sky fell last September. And I'm just trying to keep a little bit of perspective, a little bit of hope in that, and it really creates a lot of interest in this matchup with 1-2 teams, 2 teams that are currently underperforming. They're way under what their expectations are. I think it's interesting just to keep a little bit of perspective on kind of what we all thought last year, whether that makes you, less into the postseason and trusting they're going to sort it out. I completely understand, but just got to keep a little bit of perspective that we still got a few more months of football here to play.
No, I'm ready to go home. Rod says so. It's time.
Just because it's a 50 burger before we bring on Mitch, Eric Hill drops a big one, and he says, well, the first time at the bank, and it was a heartbreaking loss. I got to meet Eric, by the way, in person at my pregame tailgate show, which was great. Regardless, I'm still optimistic with the Ravens. From my vantage point, there was blatant holding. Anyways, in case no one tells you today they love you, just know that I do. #StopThe22. Appreciate
Hell
you.
yeah. Let's go, Eric.
for being with us tonight. And our next guest, thanks to Cole Jackson, is a big one. Mitchell Schwartz, of course, Super Bowl champion, 4-time All-Pro. You probably knew him from his time with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was drafted in the second round, 37th overall by Cleveland back in 2012, and of course played his college football at California. Mitch is inside the collective tonight on a Tuesday, and what better night to have you on after what we watched last night. We will transition to that at some point, but I thought we could start with, first of all, welcoming you in first and foremost. I'm Bobby, Jeff Zrebeck of The Athletic. You know Cole, obviously. And I'm just curious what you think that the state of the offensive line is in 2025 league-wide in general terms.
Ooh, going with the big one right off the bat. That's a tricky one. I mean, it does seem like it's down across the board for a variety of reasons, honestly. It seems like as obviously things have shifted, it's gone a little bit more towards the run and better efficiency and more of an emphasis the past few years to combat some of the way the defenses are playing. We haven't really seen the shift of the O-line from like the pass heavy, this is more difficult, into, well, now things are getting a little bit easier. We've kind of seen the Shanahan-McVay scheme, aside from really McVay specifically, that leans into the outside zone, have been a little less good in the pass side, shall we say. So as more of those guys are getting throughout the league, I think we're seeing a little bit of a degradation in terms of offensive line play, because the same way we evaluate quarterbacks, same way Lamar was incorrectly evaluated for a while, that what are you going to look like on 3rd and 8? What are you going to look like in a critical situation in a 2-minute drive? Well, that's really the barometer to me for offensive line play. What's it going to look like on 3rd and 8 when Micah Parsons is against you, or Myles Garrett, or these other freaks? How are you going to block them when you don't have the help, or when everyone knows it's going to be a pass? And I think that, as the snapshot of how good is your offensive line, how good are the individual linemen, I think across the board it's not quite as good as it used to be.
Mitch, thanks for joining us. Around these parts, most fans are convinced that the Ravens aren't going to win anything with this current offensive line. When you watch the group, what do you see? How do you evaluate their group?
Yeah, it's tough because the O-line's usually like the 1 week link can kind of bring things out in an offensive line. And so on any given play, this is where, when offenses in general feel disjointed, Kansas City's had a lot of experience with that the last few years that Baltimore has not had. Even as bad as it feels, for you guys being 1-2, and you're still putting up 30+ points a game. Like, the offense is still scoring, the ball's still moving, things still feel crisp. I mean, I hate getting into like the 1 or 2 bad plays a game, but you could argue a couple Derrick Henry fumbles go another direction, and it changes, and a couple outcomes of games, and now you're looking at 3-0 and feeling, hey, we're 3-0. We've got, this thing's not as good as we want it to be, but we're doing pretty good. So, yeah, from that perspective, like, your feeling as a player, if you have 10 good plays, 1 bad play, you feel really bummed about that. Like, yeah, for the most part, I'm playing pretty good. And so if everyone on your offense or everyone on your O-line is mostly having good plays, but there's 1 bad play here or there, everyone individually feels like, I'm mostly doing my part. There's a couple plays I want back, but I'm doing pretty good. Usually the O-line isn't all losing in unison. So, like, it's this tough feeling that not understanding why it's not coming together on the field when guys are having one-off plays here and there, and they're all separate. They're not all happening at the same time. So I think it's a little bit of that, a little bit of the guys you're going up against. I mean, I thought the tackles mostly were doing a pretty good job until, you go up against Miles and you go up against Hutchinson. And I was surprised how often Hutch was able to win inside last night. That was a bit of a surprise for me, especially against some, chip looks or looks where you might expect him to go through your inside. So there are those things that are a little bit weird, but not to, I think, the standard of what Baltimore's used to, not to what the standard of the expectation is. But I don't think a cause for concern or a reason for panic at this point.
Yeah, Mitch, it's always great to hear from players because you get the actual perspective of, what it was like to be in a locker room and go through the highs and lows of an NFL season. Whereas, fans, it's, either it was a bad win or a bad loss. And, there's so much doom and gloom, especially, with teams like Kansas City and Baltimore that are kind of constantly in contention. The expectations are sky high. So from the player's perspective, how do you kind of what kind of brings everyone together when, the mood is getting low? And you could argue that both Kansas City and Baltimore are in similar spots right now where, maybe it's the defense, letting Baltimore down versus the offense in Kansas City. But, what's that? Is it the voices, the leadership group in the room? Is it the coaching? Like, from your perspective, what is that kind of gel factor?
Yeah, it's usually not as much the coaches because for these two teams specifically, when there's a built-in culture, like the coach has already set that. He doesn't need to get up there and give a 15-minute team meeting on Wednesday to say, hey, guys, we need to do better. Like he might address that for a minute or two, and everyone knows that's coming. He gets his point across and move on to the next thing. The players are kind of telling each other throughout the game, hey, let's pick it up, let's go. Offensive line-wise, you're very aware if your quarterback, even if he's running into a few sacks, you're very aware if your quarterback is taking 6 or 7 sacks, and you know that you need to play better as a unit. So there's that like self-policing during the game, self-policing after when you're watching film the next day. A little bit from the coaches, obviously, but that's the beauty of being on a really good team is the expectations are so high and you're so used to having performed a certain way that when it looks, 80% of what it's supposed to, again, still scoring 30 plus points a game, it feels awful and it feels like the world's ending. And it's nice that players have that personal accountability to know that that's not good enough, that scoring the points isn't good enough. And yeah, we're a couple fumbles away. Well, let's win by 25 like we used to so that we can afford the fumble or two. We can afford the turnover or two. So I think that's the overriding sentiment is they've all been successful enough and the culture's already set that there doesn't have to be that communication as much. Now, obviously, they're going to have some vocal leaders, obviously Roque on defense and guys on offense leading the charge. Every team has that. But there's just so much more of a built-in accountability to yourself, to each other, that it doesn't have to be, players only meeting or speeches or all those things, which, after a while can get a little bit annoying, to be honest.
Mitch, if you would have told me a month ago that the winner, or I should say the loser of this upcoming game, Ravens and Chiefs, would be dropping to 1-3, I would have called you nuts. But that's the reality. There will be a team that walks into Week 5 1-3. To look at the Kansas City perspective, have we seen this movie before?
So my general sentiment is this is the most discouraged I've been about Kansas City broadly. Really since the Raiders game a couple years ago on Christmas that the Chiefs lost and it just looked like the season was over. No, won the rest of the games, won the Super Bowl. I don't think that's happening, at least winning the rest of the games at this point. But I do think there are some larger fundamental issues that need to be fixed. And it's not just Xavier Worthy's out and Rashee Rice is out and things will, kind of work themselves out when the top 2 receivers are back. That is a huge caveat. Like, I haven't seen an NFL team that has been down their top 2 receivers and performed. Most of the teams that have a top receiver, that guy's out, the offense suffers hugely. Philly, A.J. Brown goes out, offense tanks. Like Jamar Chase goes out, offense goes down. So Kansas City doesn't have one of those guys, but any team that has a top 2 that are pretty good, it's a huge, huge difference. Obviously, you guys know throughout the years, feeling like the receiver room hasn't quite been staffed to NFL standards across the board. Now all of a sudden you got those guys, and it opens up so much, on the back end. And so that is a huge caveat. That being said, the O-line's not playing well. Talking about that O-line up to their standards individually, collectively. The emphasis in my mind coming into the season was getting back to a more physical brand of ball. I think the moving away from Joe Thuney, not wanting to sign, a player of his age. I also think stylistically, he sets a little, not like a tackle, but just more like a traditional guard, where historically Kansas City's been a little firmer inside. So I think, doubling down on Trey Smith, the physicality, bringing Kingsley in there, who's a big, strong guy, kind of to solidify that interior 3. I thought that was the goal coming into the year. Jalen Moore, people thought he was an oversigned, but you look at what he is. He's a big, thick, strong dude who can, hold up on the bull rush on the edge. So I thought that was kind of the plan going into the year. Protect Pat, wider pockets, more spacious. Feel like you can sit in there, you can step up in the pocket. You don't have to necessarily start ping-ponging around and maneuvering because you're feeling compressed in there. And we haven't seen that on the field. So that would be, issue number 1 for me for the Chiefs offense overall. That just comes down to doing better individually. I think there are a couple things that could be different, in terms of some stance stuff or general alignment or a couple other things, but the performance just needs to be better. Like, Trey Smith is not playing up to his standards as the now second highest paid guard in football. Creed's had a couple weird losses. You never see him lose, head up one-on-one. Lost to Jalen Carter against the Eagles. I think he lost one last week that was very odd. Jawan, the penalties are just a huge thing. The kill drives, I think, took away literally a touchdown or a huge play. But also, he's better than people think because people know about the penalties. He's a better individual player when he's not being penalized than people think, but he didn't have a great game last week. And the way he sets in general, being a little more vertical, just kind of makes the pocket feel a little more constricted. As you guys know, with George Warhop, he's more of a vertical set guy, but he coaches it in a very specific way. And the downside to vertical setting is that the pocket might feel a little more constricted. So yeah, when you're looking kind of stylistically and the way guys are performing, I think I always start offensive line wise, and I don't think the Chiefs line is playing good enough.
Mitch, knowing Kansas City as well as you do, and knowing how good Andy Reid, Matt Nagy, and Spagnuolo are at attacking and opposing teams' flaws, what do you think they were thinking as they watched the Lions kind of take apart the Ravens there on both sides of the ball?
Wish I had Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know. That might be a pretty nice place to start. Yeah, I mean, it's just that's such a different offense. That's what the Kansas City fans and people analyzing. You got guys as high up as Orlovsky on the national scale saying things need to change fundamentally in the schematics on offense. I think that historically Andy Reid has been kind of the cutting edge guy. West Coast, and started to do kind of the West Coast shotgun spread. Brought in the fly sweep stuff in, 2017, 2018 or so, kind of led that whole revolution. But the last few years, the offense has stayed same-ish, where the trend in the NFL is getting under center. It's running the ball more, play action more from under center, more of the mid to outside zone stuff. It's less of, shotgun, pass the ball, run the ball from shotgun. It's just not very friendly to live in that world and to not have a quarterback who is a consistent threat to run the ball. If you are going to be a shotgun team, this has been Cincinnati's drawback, as you guys know, not being able to find a run game because they're a shotgun team and the quarterback doesn't run. So it's more difficult to field a consistent running team that way. So, yeah, I think that trying to find some semblance of, you don't want to go pick and choose like, well, the Lions are in this play, the Lions are in that play. Let's do that because it worked against Baltimore. Like, it has to still be part of your core identity. It has to be part of what you do. And then you blend it into your terminology, your formations, all those things. But you look at that film, you're going to say the opportunity to run the ball is there. An Andy Reid team, how much he leans into that, calling those plays, that's the different question. But the one good drive Kansas City had start to finish against the Giants was the one they went under center the most on. So hopefully they kind of start seeing that, lean into that a little bit more, make it more part of the identity and not just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, Mitch, if the O-line's sitting together, doing film and kind of looking at that Ravens game last week, they're going to see, post, the 98-yard drive specifically, the Lions offense switched to that kind of inside zone duo heavy where they just wanted to get downhill and get into the second level. And that's where they got their success. So, can you kind of take us into the film room? Like, you're sitting in there with Andy and Matt. Like, how does that kind of interaction work? Like, are you guys like, Coach, that's what we need to be doing? Because that seems like something that would really get the Chiefs back on, into their run game, especially with, the type of runners Hunt and Pacheco are. They may not be a Jahmyr Gibbs, but they fit really in that David Montgomery role where they can kind of, if they get into that third level, they can make a safety miss, they can make a DB miss. So, what's that interaction like in the film room?
You're very optimistic that Chiefs running back getting to the third level. haven't seen that very much. So I would say from the film room perspective or the way the week works, you're going to come in either the day after the game or the Tuesday after the game, watch the film on the previous week. You might get a little bit of a look ahead. But they're still doing game plan. They're still figuring that out. So you come in Wednesday on a normal week, and here's the base install. Here are the runs. Here are the things we want to attack. They're more dictating to you, like, hey, this is what we've seen. Now, obviously, as a player, you want to have watched some film. You want to be comfortable with who you're going against, personnel-wise and scheme-wise. You can't just show up and like, oh, I guess we're going against an odd team this week. Or, you want to know that you want everyone to know that you've been doing your stuff. So it's way more coach led early in the week. This is the stuff we like on film. They're going to show you all those things. They're going to have 35 cutups from last week. These are, all the runs we're going to feature. Um, these ones more specifically. Kansas City has, a certain number of runs that they typically have in the base install. But maybe this week it's more, to your point, inside zone and duo. And hey, we're going to lean heavy on it because it's been successful, not just the Lions, but, Buffalo and some other teams. And then as the week progresses, as the players watch more, then they start to kind of grasp that as well. Like, yeah, there's something to be had here. We keep seeing these guys getting rolled. We keep seeing, that Penny Sewell did a great job on the second level a lot of times against Roquan, getting up there, getting on him, making sure he wasn't part of the tackle. So we have an opportunity to move the first level, to get on guys on the second level, and to stay sustained, to your point, to get the running back to the third level. But then it's on the players once you get on the field. Once you're down there and you're feeling things, and the communication of, hey, this is what we're seeing this week. Baltimore runs into the same thing the Chiefs run into, which is every week is kind of a different game plan from a defensive coordinator. You don't exactly know how they're going to try to stop you that week, especially with the addition of Henry. Like, do we lean into the run? Do we lean into the pass? Do we try to shut down play action? From the Chiefs' perspective, it was always, what are they going to try to stop? Was it, back then, was it Tyreek and the long stuff? Was it some of the more intermediate short stuff? So figuring out what the defense is doing the first drive or two, number one. And number two, if you're feeling, hey, the stuff we thought we were going to lead the week with, that's been successful, and hey, coach, we're rolling this guy. Let's keep going. That's where the players are really empowered to, voice that and to show them on the field tangibly. Yeah, we're moving these guys, and we want to be able to lean into that. So it's interesting how the week progresses. It starts very kind of coach heavy, and then progresses more player heavy throughout the week, because also in practice they're seeing what guys are comfortable with, what they're good with, certain route combinations, what the quarterback's feeling. So yeah, it starts coach heavy, and then becomes a bit more player empowered as the week goes on, especially on game day.
I can't imagine it was very comfortable in the film room today, because the Ravens offense gave up 30 pressures last night, Mitch. And so, first of all, I saw you live tweeting, so I think you caught a good bit of last night's game. And so, just, I guess, when you look at divvying up blame here, is this more about Lamar holding on to the football and perhaps some indecisiveness, maybe some discomfort with the trust level? Or is this more about the offensive line? What did you see last night?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but I mean, again, I'm always going to say O-line first. There's also, if he has one game where he gets tackled like 4 times where he doesn't usually get tackled, like he's got, 7 years of not being tackled now. So it's pretty easy to write that one off as just kind of a fluke, or maybe like Lamar said, the guy spying him happened to grab his ankle a couple times when he wasn't expecting it to. So that's easy enough to write away, but making the quarterback feel like he's not protected, being part of the reason the quarterback might, kind of freeze up or not know what to do, that's O-line onus from day one, and it's always going to be. So yeah, individually, like I said, the tackles are going to go back and say, man, we thought we had a plan for Hutchinson, didn't work. We let him get to Lamar and affect him too much. There's that element of finishing. It's incredibly difficult to stay on your lineman the whole time and not hold when you've got a guy who's bouncing around the pocket and maneuvering. But just kind of running with Lamar, being in the way, especially the way the rules are now. If you're going back towards your own end zone, no forcible contact. Got to do the basketball shield, or make sure your arms are extended from your body. So you want to stay active as much as you can. But yeah, the O-line's going to bear the initial brunt of that, and you're going to say, yeah, Lamar had a few plays that are very uncharacteristic of him, and we're either used to seeing him make a decision or get rid of the ball or evade the tackle. But you can't have that many guys at the quarterback that many times and have it be okay when you're watching film.
Mitch, when back in April, when the Ravens were on the clock with the 27th pick, one of the guys they gave strong consideration to was Josh Simmons. And their thought process at the time was, look, it's hard to find a plug-and-play tackle late in the first round. And even though we may not need a tackle, this is an opportunity here to add a nice prospect. Ultimately, they went in another direction, and the Chiefs wound up taking Simmons. What have you seen from him, and what have you liked about what he's been able to do so far?
Yeah, he's got like a comfort and ease that is very hard to teach, especially for a rookie. Like, you can tell he's just confident in what he does. He trusts himself. There are some technical things I think he could clean up. I think his stance is a little bit too long in terms of the stagger. Tends to fall step just a little bit too much for my liking. Um, he isn't the biggest puncher. He's more of the kind of outside hand grabber, or honestly a little bit like Bakhtiari used to be in terms of how he handles contact, getting one hand kind of outside, one hand underneath. My biggest hope for him was that he would be good enough early on to kind of stick with what he's comfortable with, because every coach is going to coach you to punch. Every coach is going to coach you to use your hands, to be the aggressor. First touch, all those things. A lot of these guys who are either have scar tissue from punching incorrectly and getting their hand swiped, or having some other bad outcome, or they're just a freak and strong enough. Josh doesn't really have the body type of a guy who typically would be a catch player, but he has the strength of someone who can handle that. So his technique being his, I wanted him to be good enough to not have to change that during the season, because that becomes very uncomfortable when you feel like, man, my stuff isn't working. I'm not totally comfortable with, kind of this new technique or this new idea or what my coach has been trying to get me to do. So I like that he's been good enough to stick with what's comfortable, and then he can add things, whether it's throughout the course of the season, whether it's throughout the course of off seasons. That's the most encouraging part of his game to me. So yeah, I think the potential is sky high through the roof. I know injury wise, it wasn't necessarily that like teams were scared of what he looked like this year, but a guy who has that injury at that age, what does it look like in 2 years, 3 years? Is there going to be, an issue with the quad down the road, or something, some other area of instability because of, the severity of that injury? So, yeah, he's been a good find for Kansas City. He's been good enough this year. That's for sure. The preseason hype train got a little bit overcrowded and broke through the rails a little bit, but I think if you watch it, you see a lot of good stuff, and a lot of things that are coachable and that are technique driven that he can clean up. And yeah, that potential to be a top 3, top 2, top 1 guy. You can definitely see that, and you see it flash pretty often.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Ravens and Chiefs always drafting near one another, because they're typically in contention. But two guys that were also drafted near each other were Rosengarten and Kingsley Swamatea. And I remember after week 1, the toe game, as I like to call it, you did a really good breakdown on Kingsley Swamatea and his performance at left tackle in that game, and some of the struggles that he had. What are you seeing from him now that he's moved inside to the interior? And can you kind of talk through, because I think I've always struggled explaining this to fans that, get into offensive line play, because people just think someone's, lacking athleticism, move them inside, it'll be a lot easier. And it's really not that simple. There's a lot of, a lot more quickness, a lot more refined technique that needs to happen on the inside. So what are you seeing from Swamatea through the first few games? And is it working out a lot better than the left tackle alignment last year?
Yeah, it's definitely working out better. He's a little bit high variance at this point. Like if he loses pretty ugly and pretty quick. He had 1 or 2 against Khalil Mack in the first game, and against the Philly guys, and then the other night, like against Dex, I thought he played overall really well. But you're going to lose, and when he does lose, he tends to lose quick. So that's a bit of an issue, from the quarterback perspective. But overall, he's definitely getting better. His skill set at offensive tackle, funny enough, I thought coming out of college, he moved a lot like Orlando Brown. I don't know if it was the same number curse. I think he might have been 78 in college or something like that. But just my visual of him was a bit Orlando-ish in terms of the way he moved, a little bit higher hips, a little bit more lean. I was a little bit worried about what it would look like an offensive tackle. Through training camp, I thought there was a positive and a negative to going up against the Chiefs' defensive ends in particular. It was mostly Mike Dana, a little bit of George Karlaftis. I think Omenahu was still coming back from the injury. FAU, the first-round pick, hasn't really done too much. So he didn't get to see speed. He didn't get to see refined pass rush moves. He didn't get to see kind of high-level things that defensive ends can do. So week 1, he goes up against Baltimore, and he sees Kyle Noe, and he sees Owe, and he sees guys who have some juice off the ball. He sees guys who have some moves, who can counter you, who can prey on the fact that you're going to lean a little bit when you punch with your outside hand. So all the things I was worried about came to fruition, unfortunately, because I didn't think he had quite enough practice experience going up against that to get the timing. So moving inside the guard, yeah, if you're a guy who's high and slow and a little bit lumbering, like that's going to be worse at guard because the defensive tackles are going to get under you. They're going to be able to, be quick. They're going to everything you said. But his skill set is just better there because he can kind of slow himself down. He doesn't have to go as far. He doesn't have to move the same way. He can use both hands a little bit easier. And he's a big, strong dude. So there's an element of not having to use his hands as much. The acceleration of the guy in front of you isn't going to be quite as much. Although, I mean, you're talking about Jalen and Dex, who are two of the top 3 guys in terms of probably forced output. So yeah, his skill set has worked really well at guard. And if that guy is, your worst offensive lineman, then you probably have a pretty good offensive line across the board. Because again, I think he's shown really good stuff. A lot of good reps against Dex last week, and some good reps against Abdul Carter, who we've seen has been wrecking guys from the interior rush position. So encouraging that he can do it against big, strong defensive tackles and the quickest and shiftiest of what he can see from a body type.
And I'd be crazy not to ask you this because I know you spoke about him a little bit on Twitter, and George Warhop kind of became a name that Ravens fans got to know. I'd say a lot more than most offensive line coaches, just with the passing of Joe DeLisandris and Warhop stepping in, kind of out of the blue, for lack of a better term. And Warhop was your first offensive line coach when you joined the Browns back in 2012. I believe you had him for 2 years. So what can you kind of tell our fans a little bit about Warhop? I know you've said a lot of positive things about him. And specifically, because this is one thing that a couple of guys that I do work with in the film community, we've noticed a lot more outside hands since Warhop took over. Is that something that he kind of specifically focuses on? It's just been so interesting because we're not sure if it's coincidental. Is it something that Warhop goes to specifically? So what can you tell us about Warhop?
Yeah, I think he's a fantastic offensive line coach. I think he's one of the best in the league. Houston's O-line has been on a very steady and sharp decline since he left that building. They should have never let him go. He turns Laramie Tunsil into highest paid left tackle. Titus Howard gets a huge deal because of his tutelage, and then they let him go. So in terms of the technical side, he's not necessarily a strong outside hand emphasis guy, but he's a big puncher. His drills are awesome. I love his drills. He does things with mitts. I don't know if you guys ever see him in practice, but he puts mitts on. I don't know how much he's able to do that these days with getting up there a little bit, but he just sweats through his hat and it's dripping from the brim, and he's out there doing mitts. So he's teaching punch timing with that kind of thing, and he likes to have a little bit of independent hands or the ability to do it. Again, it's not something he necessarily goes to. He might have switched that a little bit since I worked with him, but he likes you to use your hand. He likes you to use them correctly. He does a lot of stuff with med balls as well. I'm a huge fan of punching med balls because I think there's a timing element and there's also an angle element. One thing the Chiefs offensive line coach Andy Heck talks a lot about is ascending blow. From an offensive line perspective, that's a way to gain leverage is to be hitting on the rise to take a guy's momentum and to redirect it upwards. So if you're just punching a guy, but you're punching down or punching even with them, you're not going to really have anything behind you. You're not going to link your hips with it. It's not going to sink your hips. There's a forced output that I think punching a med ball gives you great feedback because you can feel the pop. You can see the trajectory of the ball. You can aim it. If you're good at punching the ball back to the guy throwing it to you, you probably have some competency with your hands and how you're using them. So Hop leads into a lot of punching drills with med balls, with mitts. He does some pass set stuff with sandbags, which sucks when you go out there 20 minutes before practice and have a 35-pound sandbag and you're taking pass sets on air. But again, something whenever I was struggling, I would go back to that because you can't take a bad pass set with a 35-pound weight in your hands. It again links the core, it links the hips. It's very apparent if you're kind of leaning forward, if you're top heavy. As pretty much everyone knows, you're not supposed to pick things up just kind of bent over at the waist and leaning. You want to bend your knees, get your hips into it, get your core activated. So all those same principles is offensive line play, and I think he's great at teaching that. He's good at differentiating between what the center's doing, what the guards are doing, what the tackles are doing. That's something I think a lot of coaches struggle with from the tackle perspective, especially because everything you do drill-wise, for the most part, is punching something in front of you. Well, as an offensive tackle, you're always punching someone off the side of you at an angle. So it's easy to say, he teaches guards to kind of punch at the tops of the numbers of the defensive tackle. You can't do that for an offensive tackle. When am I going to front up a guy where I can consistently punch at the tops of both numbers. That's just not the angle that you go on. So, yeah, I think his drills travel really well, position to position. I think they travel well regardless of which guy you're going up against. One thing I've seen out of Rosengarten a little bit this year is that what Warhop would call the three-step short. The way he teaches vertical setting, also very different. He doesn't teach like kicks as one whole thing. He teaches individual steps. So one kick traditionally would be 2 steps for him, because in his mind and the way vertical steps work, if you're just kicking and the inside leg's coming along for the ride, it kind of opens your hips up as you go. You really have to like think of, as the right tackle, the left foot, like pulling it back and in, and that keeps you square and vertical. So it's not just like a kick and a drag, it's a step, 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 step. Well, the 3 steps short is step, step, third step, you go get on the guy. So when you see the Ravens offensive tackles, it's giving the appearance of a vertical set because you've been vertical setting all day. And then you're using that, kind of change up that angle to throw things off against the defensive end. It's a hard thing to trust, especially on 3rd and 12, thinking I'm going to take 2 steps back and go jump and get on a guy. But man, you do it once or twice. Usually when you have slide help and the guard or center are going to be there for you, and you catch a guy mid rush, you're like, whoa, like I didn't think that was going to work. And you start to trust it, you start to get the feel for it, and it's crazy, man. Like you could have told me my entire life, on 3rd and 12 against Carlos Dunlap, you're going to be stepping back and then jumping him, and I would have said no way. But it works. That's again his whole philosophy. You have to have multiple sets. You have to have different counters, things you do. So yeah, I think he's really good at kind of all those aspects of offensive line play, and he's pretty good schematically as well. And I think from a intensity perspective, he brings that. I think he is a good motivator. So I've got nothing but great things to say about him.
And that's just further proof that offensive tackles are just better dancers than the interior guys. It's all in that footwork.
I don't know if you've got my wedding footage. I don't know if you agree with that. I will say offensive tackles I'm a tackle elitist for sure. The way I put it is you don't ever see a guy fail at guard and say, all right, well, we'll kick him out the tackle and he'll survive.
That's right.
But fail tackle, like, why don't you go on inside? And all of a sudden they start surviving pretty good.
And if all else fails, they can play defensive tackle, right?
Yeah, something like that. Out team maybe.
Mitch, I don't know, man. You might be shorting yourself there when it comes to the wedding footage, because if it's anything like what you're doing in the kitchen these days, and of course it just goes to commercial as I cut over here. But how about Mitch in the kitchen? I thought about thanking you on behalf of the group for coming out and being like, hey, what can we plug for you? And then I clicked on your YouTube channel and I found a steak tutorial, Mitch in the kitchen. It'll cut to you in just a second. You've got the red apron on. So tell us about what you got going on in the Schwartz kitchen.
Yeah, this was from a little bit ago. It's definitely slowed down since we had our daughter 15 months ago now. But I love cooking. I'm a big guy. But honestly, at some point early on, I kind of migrated away from cartoons and started watching the Food Network, and it was just something that really interested me. I got to college and had the ability to kind of cook for myself, and when you're there in the off season and doing all sorts of things, it's a great skill to have, and it just became more of a passion. I kept watching more stuff. The internet makes it great for that. Got to Cleveland and got more money and more space and got to buy some gadgets. Came to Kansas City, barbecue mecca. Got to buy a smoker and have even more space. And yeah, the love has just progressed. And then I started posting stuff online, and people would always ask for recipes or how you doing it. And thought, well, I'll start a blog and write some recipes. And then it turned out video was a little bit easier. So yeah, it's just something that I love doing. I feel like I enjoy doing the research. I definitely don't do things haphazardly. There's a purpose behind them. And so if I feel confident enough about what I'm cooking and what I'm feeding my wife and my kid and all those things and other people, I probably feel good enough sharing that with everybody else. So yeah, kind of just a passion project and something I like to revisit once things settle, although it doesn't seem like life's going to settle down anytime soon, even though
not for 18 years. Not for 18
yeah, that's I see that.
Well, hey, Mitch, we really appreciate the time. Cole, thanks for making it happen. We're looking forward to this matchup, obviously, on Sunday, and we really appreciate your insights along the way. It should be a good one if it lives up to the billing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I think Baltimore is going to show up. Kansas City, we'll have to step up because I mean, despite the record, I think Baltimore's put a lot more good on tape than Kansas City has. So I'm hopeful it's as exciting and as good of a game as we all think it will be.
Love it. Thanks for the time,
Thanks,
man. We
Mitch.
hope to do it again down the road.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks,
Appreciate
man.
you.
Awesome. Cole, great stuff, man.
That was phenomenal. Yeah.
That is I hadn't realized that he worked with Warhop earlier on in his career in Cleveland, so that was some good stuff there. I mean, clearly they're in a period of transition.
You know, they started on a division rival, so you get to know them just from kind of looking around the division at the teams you're playing twice a year. So, and then of course goes to Kansas City when Baltimore and Kansas City become closer rivals. So it's been fun to follow his career. What a career! Like to go, you know, from a second round pick and really develop. But I mean, his first All Pro wasn't until 2016, so he was in his kind of fourth. I think it was when he got to KC. So, you know, really developed across from Joe Thomas. Played with Alex Mack. Those Cleveland Browns teams always had good offensive linemen. So, you know, really developed and then took those talents to Kansas City and became a champion. I just think it's one of the more. It's just such a cool career to watch, and a lot of his skill set reminiscent of Rosengarten, which I found very interesting. It was kind of one of my player comps when Rosie was coming out. So definitely a guy that I like to go back and watch some of his film and the good stuff he put on tape.
I love some of the technique stuff too, with, you know, the 2-3 steps he's talking about, the hand placement, you name it. He knows his stuff. So thanks to Mitch Schwartz for joining us tonight. Guys, let's rip through some super chats and get on out of here. It's been a long day for all of us for different reasons. So why don't we just kick things back off with Richard, who wrote, with the way the players were after the game, and Jeff, why don't you take this one? Do you think Harbs is losing the locker room? He's supposed to be a culture coach, and the culture is soft.
I don't think he's losing the locker room. I think players are frustrated. I think they think they're better than they're playing. I think it's something to watch, but I've seen no indications yet that this locker room is splintering. You know, but they need to start winning some football games because it's going to get late early. This is a tough part of their schedule. They're going to start losing. They've already lost a few guys, but I don't see any indication, though, as of yet, that they've lost, that the locker room's splintering or he's close to lost the locker room. That is one of John Harbaugh's strengths.
Thanks, Richard. Manny writes, Bisciotti better call Ray for that head coaching job, Bobby. Joanne 224, Cole, for you.
O-line has struggled some since the passing of Coach D. I mean, yeah, it was interesting. You know, I thought they really gelled down the stretch last year. I think people really, and I say people, I actually include myself in this, really underestimated the impact that changing offensive line coaches could have on the O-line, and they really started slow. But, you know, I find the last 10 weeks, including playoffs, have been a lot more consistent than what we've seen. And we kind of talked about this preseason. You know, I was expecting some sophomore slump looks from Rosengarten. You know, Voorhees hasn't looked as good as he did in the preseason, and it really shows what happens when you get in there against starters. So, you know, they've played a couple good defensive fronts, but the problem is there's a lot more to come. So, you know, they're going to just have to gel like they did down the stretch last year. Sorry.
And Jeff Dreams checking in.
As a fan, I want to think this is just adversity, but realistically, Harbaugh's had 3 Super Bowl caliber teams since 2019 and no results, just poor execution. Yes, the blemish on John Harbaugh's coaching record is the lack of playoff success since the 2012 run. That's impossible to argue. And within that, it's the fact that the team tends to lose its identity at playoff time and not be at their best when their best is required. And that's something John Harbaugh preaches, and the team hasn't done it since 2012. So ultimately, that should be a reflection of the head coach. I would agree.
Sod Blitz writes, Cole, I'd be interested to know if you know how many times Jenkins was blown off the ball. It seemed like he had gotten pushed 5 yards back way too often.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because he made a couple plays in the first half. You know, if you go to that 3rd and 1, it was on the 98-yard touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs converted on 3rd and 1, and Jenkins blew his guy up. He blew the center up, and it was actually Brent Urban who just got completely sealed and opened the gap. So, and Jenkins also had a tackle for a loss for -3. I think what happened with Jenkins, which happens with a lot of noses, is once you get worn down, it's hard for those big dudes to get their cardio back. And I think you really saw that impact on Travis Jones. Jeff kind of mentioned potential banged up, but I think the cardio aspect of it, really clicked in on these defensive linemen last night.
Everybody getting their last couple comments in here. Sean Coles, whose little one wants to make an appearance, by the way. Who do we got?
Is that you, JC?
Is it? I hear somebody crying, but I can't tell if it's in my.
I think it's yours.
I'm so delirious by now. It would be par for the course if it is mine. It's somebody, but I'm so delirious at this point, or maybe I just hear that sound so much it just doesn't even resonate.
You know what? Excuse my French. Fuck primetime games. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. Sean Coles writes, can we discuss John's head, which was forcefully shoved up his rear end? I'm guessing based on the weak response we received. Steve O, I didn't know why did I give myself that one? Steve O writes, Cole, let's finish here. Steve O, Cole, your thoughts on Mike Green. This is why we need a producer to read this shit before I end up reading it, make myself on a freaking soundbite. Why don't you take this one to get us on out of here, Cole, from Steve O.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick on this. I was the leader of the Mike Green hype train. There's the nice thing about doing content and Twitter and YouTube is, everything I say is recorded and published. It's going to go on a server that's going to outlast us all. So, I mean, I can't hide from it. I expected a hell of a lot more from Mike Green. And maybe this is a good lesson when you look at Voorhees and Green. Maybe my mistake was putting too much into what they were able to do in the preseason. Maybe it really was that big of a difference in the level of competition, because both looked significantly more refined than what we've seen. I do think if you look at Mike Green specifically, one of the issues I think was him going into low gear rushes in Buffalo, and he just hasn't looked explosive at all since that game. And it's how much of a mental impact has there been? How much can we expect Chuck Smith to kind of get him right? I think it's a huge thing. He did have that really nice rep against Penei Sewell where he ran through his face last night, but I think I'd also feel a lot differently. Like with Peebles and with Mike Green, I was kind of expecting flashes early in the season, not necessarily starting caliber play over the full course of games, but both are, with the injuries, are being put into a position where they gotta show up and make plays right away, or else it's going to be a lot more noticeable. So I think that's really where I stand on Green.
Fun episode tonight, guys. We want to say thanks to Mitch Schwartz, Super Bowl champ from his time in Kansas City. Of course, 4-time All-Pro and an offensive line guru, and apparently a part-time chef for dropping in. Cole, great job on the booking side of things there. We look forward to these Tuesday nights, obviously, all year long. If you guys aren't familiar yet with what we're up to, it's Tuesday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern. And the way that you can help out outside of Super Chats and just showing up is liking the video, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, telling a friend, dropping this channel and the channel link into group chats, Facebook groups, you name it. Word of mouth will continue to allow this thing to grow. And again, thanks to Sleeper for sponsoring tonight's episode, as they will all season long. You can use promo code HMA. That's our promo code HMA. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. So for Jeff, Cole, I'm Bobby signing off from this Tuesday night Ravens Collective episode. We'll be back with you a week from today. And again, there's going to be a lot to discuss. We could be looking at a 1-3 team that's still weeks out from their early bye, or we could be looking at a team that picks up in the Lamar era, which would be its first win in Arrowhead in Kansas City. They've only beat this team head-to-head in the Lamar era once, and we all remember that back in September of 2021. So thanks for being with us tonight, guys. We will catch up with you next week. Have an awesome next few days, and get ready for what should be a massive game in the 425 slot coming up on Sunday.